Welcome everybody, my name is Matt Bailey. I'm your National Ambassador from the Australian branch of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I'm very honoured to be sitting here today with Euan Campbell, the Spirits Manager for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society here in the UK. That's where I am right now. I'm still in Scotland and I've really honoured to have a bit of time on this Saturday afternoon. It's the first time it's ever rained in Edinburgh for me ever. And I'm really enjoying this typical Edinburgh weather rather than the unusual sunny days we've had for the last few. Euan has also brought out some whiskies, and we're going to have a bit of a chat, have a few drams, and discover some of the stories and history behind it all. So thank you.
These are from my personal stash as well. So
personal stash. This isn't. We haven't pinched these from the vaults. These are definitely a personal stash of Euan's.
Not on expenses.
No expense account was harmed in the making of this video. So yeah, thank you so much for just having a chat and saying hello to the Australian members about what we are, and so they can learn a bit more about what you do.
Yep. And
what your role is at the society and what that all means. So I just want to start with, before we even get into the first dram, just tell me a bit about how it all came about, where your journey came from, and what the Spirits Manager does at the society.
Sure. Well, I started back in 2008 working as a barman at the Vaults, which is a great place to cut your teeth in the society.
11 years.
Yeah, 11 years has flown by. So I did that for a couple of years. In 2010, I moved into the events team, where I looked after our UK members tastings programme. And in 2013, I moved into the spirits team under the working title of the Whisky Dude, which I thought was pretty cool.
Was that with Kai then as well?
That was with Kai as well, yeah.
Yep.
So that role has gradually evolved into the one I'm in now, which is Spirits Manager. So I look after all of our cask stock, oversee the tasting panel, so the selection process as well, and also plan our bottling programme. So it's quite a wide remit. A normal day for me would involve sampling various whiskies for different reasons. Normally like to do that in the morning while the palate's fresh. Mm-hmm. So there'll also be lots of logistics to try and plan, so moving casks around, bringing wood in from various cooperages and things like that. So there's a lot of planning and organisation. My favourite stuff at the moment is probably the NPD, a bit of the blending and experimentation, because it's just a chance to really have a lot of fun.
For those at home, that's the blending and experimentation we might know as the heresy bottlings, the exotic cargo, Pete Fairy, and some extra projects that are coming up soon that I've been lucky enough to taste with the UK team that we'll be able to reveal soon enough. But I'm sure there's a few more in the works after that. Absolutely,
yeah. We've got a bit of a pipeline. It's never going to be a major feature of what we do, but you know, it contributes to the journey that members can go on and exploring different flavours and you know what we can do with whiskey.
That's amazing. So, do you want to introduce this first whiskey, and then we'll have a chat about go through some of the next questions?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we've actually killed this bottle today. Last 2 drams. It's in the sort of 2008 livery. So I don't know when this was bottled, but it must have been a wee while ago. So it's from distillery number 7, one of my favourites. 7 years old.
Love our sevens.
And first fill bourbon barrel. It's kind of music to your ears, you know, that combination. So this is just, I remember actually a friend of mine bought this for me when we were in Queen Street.
Oh.
So I had mentioned that I really liked it, and he came back with a bottle.
So those playing numbers at home, that's 7.152, deeply absorbed but at ease. We're going to start off with there. So just with this, whilst we're nosing and appreciating this, do you want to just let everyone at home know what the... that's Frank, by the way, that's Euan's cat.
Hi. Right, Frank, get out of the way, come on.
Do you want to let the members know how the tasting panel works? Just a bit more in depth on the tasting panel, because often when I'm hosting an event, I get to talk about how every single society release is approved by the tasting panel. Mm-hmm. And if we don't like it, we don't bottle it. So tell me, rather than just that sort of overview, a little bit more in depth on what the tasting panel is and how it works?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So at the moment we've got around 20 panellists in the pool, and we'll meet on a weekly basis in smaller groups. It's not all 20 of us. Generally, we'll sit with 12 samples. We found that was sort of a happy medium. We tried more in one session. It's quite difficult to.
The tipping point at 12.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and we all feel quite comfortable that that's a sensible place to stop. So we will look at the colour. We nose, taste, reduce, and repeat. And I actually recently helped to design a web app. So we all input our tasting notes into this, and it will save every individual panellist's impressions. And if the recommendation is to bottle the whisky, then all of those tasting notes go to the panel chair. So they're kind of the more senior, longer-standing panellists in the group who come up with the tasting notes.
Okay.
So they're literally looking at everybody's detailed impressions and pulling together this. It's about 100-word tasting note, I think, in the outturn, and shorter on the label, which I guess is why we often end up with some quite wacky and expressive names, because it's multiple people's impressions condensed down into one note. So it's fairly straightforward, really.
Fairly straightforward, but it's interesting that the pool can change over time as well of people and of. Do you ever have any guests, for instance, on the panel? Or?
So we joined the Scotch Whisky Research Institute as of January this year. So we got a sort of sensory set from them that we like to put new panellists through. It's an evaluation of 20 sort of sniff pots, and based on your scores from that and your general sort of whisky credentials, then you would be allowed onto the panel. So we maybe would allow someone to sit in on occasion, but it's quite tough to get in. Yeah, and there's a long waiting list, as you can imagine.
I think I'm on the waiting list, but it's I'm probably 100th or something of that one at the moment. I just have to remark on this dram, just take a moment. That is, I often find with certain codes, 41s, 76s, things like that, I find a lovely sort of like waxiness and paper waxiness sort of. Whereas with our 7s, I almost always find that like oily mouthfeel in the 7s is sort of a absolutely mouth coating, sugary sort of balance to it that I love in a whiskey.
Yeah, there's so much texture in this, and the lead notes for me are mango and coconut.
First fill, bourbon barrel, and 12 years old, for those who are wondering.
And it's 59.7%, so it's quite punchy, especially for the first dram of the day.
It's, by the way, it's 2:30 in the afternoon right now on Saturday, so it's hey, it's a weekend, right?
Yeah. 162 bottles as well. So at some point, something may have leaked out of this cask as well, which I tend to find when you get low outturn, you end up with a much more intense, somehow concentrated whiskey. I guess it stands to reason. If some of it's been leaking or driven off by temperature, you end up with this real intensity.
I've added a little bit of water to mine, and I think it's opened up just nicely. And not a very scientific way of adding water, but it's actually the way I prefer, as those who've been to my tastings will attest.
Yeah, I mean, I generally... you have to be careful because you can't take it out, but I throw away pipettes, to be honest. I can't stand it. I just like to pour a slug of water in and then see what, see. And as I said, this one's quite punchy, so I know it can take a good
dash.
splash.
Yeah. Lovely. So just another question for you whilst we're enjoying this. Are there any particular, on panel, are there any particular points of flavour that you would, or are there any points along the way in the panel process that you deem to be a mark of always like a mark of quality? And conversely, on that same question, are there any marks of failure that you often taste in a cask and go, that's not good. We should not bottle that.
Yeah, I mean, every cask is different, as kind of we always say. So you have to judge them on their own merits. So there's a kind of objective side to it where you're going, what make are we tasting? What cask type is it? And are the flavours as expected for that criteria? And if they're not, is that a bad thing? You know, because you can still get things that are totally off the wall that are fantastic whiskies. So
even apart from house style, etc.
Yeah. So there's that kind of objective side of it. But then I always think it's really important to balance with the subjective side, because all of the panellists are members of the society as well. So it's that sort of I like to imagine if I'm sitting at home in my living room, like we are now, and I'm drinking this dram, am I happy with it? So I think you need the kind of technical judgment, but if it ain't a pleasure to drink, then what's the point anyway?
Yeah.
So it's about a bit of balance.
So there's no sort of specific points. It's more sort of in a case by case basis.
Yeah, and say you might pick up some sulphury notes or something, but if it's, for example, worm tub distilled or
distillery sulphur rather than cask sulphur, sure.
Then you're like, well, it is sulphury, but let's make sure we put that in the note. And it's not a flaw; it's actually engineered into the spirit to give it kind of some depth and body. Yeah.
So my next question was: are there any society releases over the years, in the 11 years you've been involved, at least, that you can recall back on and say that was? It went in a completely different direction from what you're expecting. Like in an instance like this cask, where you got it, it's a 12-year-old, it's a first fill barrel, but then you nose and taste it, and it's just not what you expected, or maybe even one of the heresies that never just went in a different direction from what you anticipated.
Well, I think one point is that you're always unearthing weird and wonderful casks. So I remember, for example, one from Distillery 27. I cannot remember the cask number, but all the information on all the paperwork said refill bourbon hogshead, and it was bright red and incredibly fruity. So we were kind of like, okay. And we were able to dig down further into that and find out that it was filled into a ex-red wine barrique. So things like that, where you discover something weird has happened, but it's a great result. That's pretty good. One of the kind of downsides as well, we were chatting about this just a little bit earlier. We've bottled a cask recently that had an outturn of 4 bottles. Now,
this isn't like a UK bottling of 4 bottles; it's a global outturn of 4 bottles. Like, that's unbelievable. Euan only said this to me 10 minutes before we started filming, and I'm still in awe of that.
Well, for me, for its age, I think it was 8 or 9 years old. Distillery 72, and it was one of the best whiskies I tasted in the last 12 months. It was so tropical and concentrated, like I was talking about. Maybe the 4 bottles explains why. That we only found that out when we took it. We picked the cask to take it for bottling, and there's nothing left in this. So I had to ask our bottler to do it by hand in the lab, so it all got hand filtered and obviously not chill filtered. But
obviously not chill filtered.
To take out the bits of cask and whatever. But that was a stunning whiskey and then an unexpected outcome. The blended malts, we start off with a kind of general idea of what we're after. But yeah, there's
from flavour profile down sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you can look for inspiration. And they don't always end up. There's one that's in the pipeline that we went with the 12th recipe for. So there's a lot of trials and testing and experimenting to try and arrive at the right place. And if at the end you go, well, 12 isn't quite what we started out with, but it's by far the best one, let's go with that. So I think that's a great thing about this range as well, is that we've got the freedom. We're not trying to create consistent batch after batch. We're almost taking the concept of the single cask one-off nature, but we're making it slightly larger. But no 2 batches of exotic cargo are trying to be exactly the same.
No. Okay. Awesome. So, what's the difference in approach for the society at the moment that you would remark on from just a relationship level on the difference between working with, say, a well-established and old and huge distillery, and let's say quite a young distillery that you might find up near St Andrews, or might find somewhere else that's quite young and they've only got 2 or 3 and 4 year old spirit on hand at the moment.
Yep.
Is there a difference in approach with working with these distilleries? And
again, every company is different. But so in one way, it's much the same. If you speak to the right people and agree the deal, you send in your cask for filling, or you select the parcels that you're going to buy, and you carry out the transaction, and that's much the same. The kind of real difference, I think, is with the smaller. Sorry.
No, Frank's all right.
With the smaller distillers, we have a chance to really experiment. So we've got some casks in the warehouse just now that contain spirit that was kind of designed by the society in conjunction with.
That's amazing. Small
distilleries. So we would sit down for a coffee with the head distiller and decide what parameters we want to tweak and what we're going for.
Yeah.
We've done some mixed mash bills of different grains and things like that.
Amazing.
And that kind of thing is not really possible on a larger scale. So that's where the main difference is, I think. But the industry, trading casks is much the same across the board, I would say.
Okay. Just going back to the panel just for a second, can you give us a fuller rundown of how flavour profiles are selected for each cask?
Yeah.
We have for those members who already know, but for those who don't, we have 12 flavour profiles that we draw upon, everything from light and delicate to heavily peated and everything in between, as you'll find on our site. And it's those 12 flavour profiles give members a chance to sort of latch onto what sort of whiskey type they're going to be at least having an expectation of flavour profile without knowing the exact details on the cask. Actually, before you go into that, do you want to tell us a bit about the second one?
The second one, yeah. I mean, this is a really interesting distillate.
2.81 repeater.
Yeah. So this is from distillery 76. The number is 76100. So this is a 19-year-old from a refill sherry butt.
Okay.
Bottled at 58.1%. So this is
Lovely.
One of the ones I was talking about. This is renowned for its spirit sulphur and the real meaty character that they build up during distillation.
It's definitely a meaty spirit in that glass right now.
Yeah.
It's a very heavy spirit. That's fantastic.
And if that was a different distillate, you may have a little bit of debate in the...
If you can't see through Frank, there's the 76.100. But Frank's adding to the atmosphere. He's good. Do you want to smell? So, So tell us, it's a flavour profile approach. How does that...
So flavour profile is the last thing that's attributed to the whiskey during the panel process. Generally, we'll just have a discussion about which one we think fits best. And if there's any disagreement, we can kind of defer it and allocate it once we see the finished tasting note. So, I mean, they're supposed to be broad strokes that can guide people towards things they might not necessarily have tried. So it unites whiskies from different regions and different styles, but they're grouped by flavour. But you tend to find that a whiskey could potentially span over 3 different flavour profiles sometimes.
Right.
And you might have a bit of disagreement in the panel. But
especially if it's... I'm going to take a wild guess. If it's somewhat lightly peated, it might fall into oily and coastal. It might fall into lightly peated.
Some people maybe pick up the peat a bit more, and it's into peated. If it's in a sherry cask, some people might go, it's peated, but actually I think it's deep rich and dried fruit.
Yeah.
So you have to just have a chat about it and pick what you think the best one is.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'll just remark on last night at Queen Street, the Kaleidoscope Bar at Queen Street. I was sitting with Graham and Faye Cool from Glen Murray Distillery, and we're having a dram. And one of the drams that were picked out by the bar staff was 108.14, I think.
Oh yeah.
And it's a 7-year-old peated whiskey from 108, That's the first time I've ever had a peated whiskey from 108 ever in my life. And the 108s we've seen in Australia for Australian members have all been either young and sprightly or light and delicate. They've all been fairly on the brisker, lighter side of the cask profile. But Faye mentioned that it was far peatier on the palate than it was on the nose. Mm-hmm. And then with a bit of water added, it even became, the peat sort of actually came out even more.
I think that was the case with the Peat Fairy as well. It was really quite light and fruity on the nose with a wisp of peat. And then when you tasted it, you got the kind of medicinal, the more strong peaty punch, and then with reduction as well. So maybe, and that was a blend of Speyside and Islay. Yep. So maybe the fact you've got this creamy Speyside whiskey, but made with peated barley, bourbon matured as well, maybe that does something to make the nose lighter and the taste heavier. I'm not sure, but it's something I've experienced before. That's just massive, isn't it?
That's just huge. It's even bigger on the palate than I was expecting. As Euan said, that they've got a very heavy sulphur distillate from this. They're from their 2.811111 distillation, and then if you take the fact that it's 19 years old, so it's getting up there from a refilled sherry butt. You get a very rich cask profile, but
yeah, it's a good quality cask, isn't it?
Like everything that passes the panel, I do notice that we've got that a great whiskey for me, as I sometimes say, is where the distillate and the cask meet right in the middle, and the cask hasn't overwhelmed the spirit, and the spirit hasn't overwhelmed the cask, and I think that's an example of that exactly happening. It's almost like it would have been too young at 19 and overcooked at 20 years old.
Yeah. A fine balance.
I'll let that sit. I've not added any water to that only because it's... Oh, it is 58. I thought you said 51. I got that wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, just a few drops of that. So that's held up. It's held us its proof very high after 19 years to still be 58.4%.
Yeah, sherry butts are kind of weird beasts. I mean, this is only 214 bottles as well, so low outturn. But you sometimes find... I was looking at one of our sherry butts that had a ridiculous high outturn, and I reckon it must have been, very close to the maximum 700 litre capacity that you're allowed to use for Scotch, and then it had worked out at something like 1.2% loss per year, which is not actually unusual for sherry butts.
Right.
I don't quite know why that is, but they tend to lose less in the bigger casks.
So it might have even been below 1.2 almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last of the main questions for today. When there's a decision that comes to, if you could just explain the whole finishing process that we see at society sometimes, where a cask spends, let's say, 12 years in a refill ex-bourbon barrel, and then 2 years or 3 years in a different type of barrel. Mm-hmm. So it's gone from one cask to one cask as a single cask whiskey. Can you explain how that process comes about, when you decide to do that, and why and when? I guess on those ones, on the whole sort of finished barrels.
Yeah, sure. So, for example, last year I was lucky enough to go out to Jerez to secure a supply of sherry casks, and then when I came back, obviously we'd had an idea of how we were going to use these, but you have to kind of finalise and select the casks. So we'll fill quite a lot of them, but we also want to try and provide as much variety as possible. So say, for example, if we've got 100 casks of Distillery 44 in refill bourbon hogsheads, we may put 20 of those into Oloroso, 10 into PX, some into red wine, a bit of experimentation as well as the more traditional styles of casks. And it just allows us to kind of play different tunes with our stock and use the quality casks that we're able to access. So some, I've spoke to a cooperage in the States and got a completely custom made barrel, so in terms of how long the oak's seasoned for, how heavily it's charred and toasted, and then added toasted heads to it and things like that. And we're very keen to experiment and you got to experiment on your whiskey, the whiskey that you have, you know. So we just like to take things in different directions. Of course, on occasion you'll get whiskies where the cask is just not doing its job, so you might decide to change it. But at the earlier in the process that you have control, so you know we're filling a hell of a lot of whiskey each year into guaranteed top quality wood. So the earlier you have control in the process, the less likely it is that you'll have that scenario.
Okay.
And if you do, you leave it for a long time and keep monitoring it as well.
Okay. Yeah, that answers the question. Before we go into the quickfire round, which was submitted by people on Twitter, I thought we might actually have a just if you want to introduce this third bottling. Now, for those with a keen eye, and this has been switched around a bit here, that is not your normal sort of society bottle shape. So I'll let Euan introduce that, and I'm actually extremely humbled to be able to share this, and actually him be able to share this with me. So I'm extremely grateful for that.
Yeah. So this is from a range that the Society did back in 2007. I think it was for the Edinburgh Festival. So this particular one is called With Words. It was a whole range about sharing whiskies with friends, with music, with words. I think there was a with food. So,
and there was 20-something bottlings?
Well, actually, so this is a similar sort of project. We did one called the 26 Malts.
That's right,
and that would have been before this.
Yeah,
and
okay.
It is a different...
I don't know if this is the same one.
No, I think this is a different range. I don't think that these ones were in the 26 Malts range. But it was another experimental release that we did. So this particular one is finish on a smoky one. Distillery 66. It's 66.24. Aged 22 years. And this one was distilled before I was born, March 1985.
I was 5 months old.
Ah, okay. 52.7% ABV. So it's a 22-year-old bottled in 07. It's got a lovely dark colour to it. This particular distillate is one that I always feel excels with age. It gets really, really foody and savoury. You can imagine having it with roast beef or even haggis or something like that. You've got peppery, creamy.
I'll give us a nice close-up of that later, but in the meantime, I want to just raise a glass and thank you so much for actually sharing this with me.
No problem. That's what whiskey's for.
Indeed. And Euan's comment there about how the distillate from 66 often, I mean, the younger casks are, in my opinion, just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
But some of the older ones we get, and if you have a look on the most recent outturn, and I think June outturn, I'll have to check those numbers, but it's June outturn. I think we're releasing the second in the series of the much older 66s, which they've got that old, rich, savoury sort of note going on.
Have you tried it? It's mind-blowingly good.
That is fantastic.
Like peppercorn sauce.
Yeah.
Like really charred beef. Oh. So I think I opened that bottle maybe about 2 months ago. So it's had a wee bit of time to breathe as well.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's just, wow.
Well, it's not been open 10 years though.
No.
Wow. Okay, well, whilst we're enjoying that third whiskey, and that is delicious, charred beef and peppercorn is bang on, isn't it? That's just fantastic. There's no tasting notes on that bottle.
No, it's Pre Flavour Profiles as well.
Pre Flavour Profiles,
where would you put that if
Yeah.
it was Flavour Profile today? Where would you?
Honestly, and I know this is almost controversial, but it's got the characteristic of an old and dignified.
Yeah,
I know it's still got that peat, so it could almost be. I'd almost put that in lightly peated, but I would actually put that in old and dignified.
Yeah, so perfect example of how it can fit into multiple ones. And I guess you look at the overarching flavour profile, and then the tasting note can guide you. So if you're not a fan of peat, I don't think you're being misled.
No,
because it's just a way to guide you. This definitely has some of the notes that you only get in long aged whiskies, the kind of Dunnage Warehouse earth and floor aromas.
Lovely.
Yeah.
That's one to take some time on. So some quick fire questions which were asked by our Twitter audience. I'm peeking a little bit on the mic there. Okay. Dear Euan, what's the next big thing that the SMWS is up to that you can tell us about, and what can worldwide members expect in the next year or two? Any secrets about some of the projects coming up that they might want to sneak on that you're allowed to mention?
Yeah, so it's always difficult, isn't it, to try not to give away too much. But we've already alluded to we're still working on different blended malts to push some boundaries and take flavours in different directions. We're hoping to introduce more world whiskies to the portfolio.
Yep.
So and we also have a range of amazing older whiskies coming up in the pipeline, and they're just some of the finest ones I've tasted.
That's awesome. And they might be possibly vaults releases.
Yeah, so some will make it into the Vaults collection, which is kind of our most rare and remarkable casks.
For those who remember the 27, 24, and the third one... No, it was just the 27 and 24 that we've had so far, I think, for the Vaults collection in Australia.
We had 29.
Not 27. 29.
No,
24. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the two.
Yes.
Yeah. And we featured the
No, and the 25.
25.
24,
You're right, sorry.
25, 29.
The Lowland. I forgot the Lowland.
Yeah.
Can't forget Lowlands. 25, 24, and 29. And we featured that 29 at an event with collaborated with Whisky and Ailment and Beam Suntory just at the end of last year, which was fantastic. What is your worst / most embarrassing whiskey-related experience?
I'm not sure I could go into the embarrassing one,
Okay.
but the or multiple embarrassing ones. The worst, I think, would be a sample that I got into the office, and it smelled really strange, but curiosity got the better of me, and I had a taste of it as well, and it burned. It was so spicy. I don't know if you remember this. We used to create a condiment called hot Scotch sauce.
Some of our older members might remember that one. It was before my time.
So this was fantastic as a condiment for cooking. It was basically single cask whiskey with a whole load of Scotch bonnets thrown into the cask and left to do the work. And I had missed that this was a cask of hot Scotch when I ordered the sample. So I literally was drinking 60% plus whiskey laced with Scotch bonnets. I went down to the warehouse and got a torch and popped the bung and had a look, and there was over 100 Scotch bonnets floating in this cask. So we've still got it in the warehouse. It's 1995 from Distillery 42.
Right.
And it's just kind of sat there until we decide what to do with it. I don't know if we'll ever make a new hot Scotch. Maybe we do a 30-year-old hot Scotch release or something.
The oldest and rarest hot Scotch release in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a quick fire round. So, what does the SMWS look like in 10 years to you? To you?
Well, I think as I said, we'll have a lot more world distilleries in our portfolio. We will be present in many more countries around the world, so we can spread the whiskey. I think we'll have a strong core of sherried whiskies because we're investing a lot of money in quality casks from that part of the world at the moment. I personally would love to see us with a distillery one day, but that's a whole whole different ball game. So I wouldn't get too excited about that. I'm not sure it's on the cards. It's just something I would love to see at some point.
One question from someone says, there's a lot of fully matured SMWS releases these days in ex-bourbon casks, but not much else. Why is that?
I'd say, roughly speaking, maybe 90% of the industry fillings are into bourbon. And we've been working really hard to ensure
as you just said, there's a lot of investment in sherry.
Yeah, exactly. And ensure variety across the board. So, as I say, we're filling a large proportion of our requirement for. So, if you imagine for any vintage year, you probably know for 2019 vintage, over the next 30 to 40 years, how many casks are we likely to bottle from that vintage? So we'll be looking to fill maybe up to half of the requirement. So that's from the off. And then in the next maybe 3 to 4 years, pick up appropriate stocks to hit the 100% volume mark. So within that filling, we're filling lots and lots of sherry in particular, but other things as well. I see this question earlier, and I had a quick check of our stocks, and at the moment we've got over 1,200 non-bourbon full-term maturation casks in stock. But I guess, you
heard it here first.
Managing whiskey stocks is quite a complicated business, and it moves in waves, as the industry itself does. So you'll always see peaks in certain availability of distilleries or cask types, but I mean the future is bright in that respect, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Is there anything you've tasted recently from some of the newer distilleries popping up that you'd like to remark on?
Well, without being too specific, I mean, all the new make that I've tried is just fantastic across the board, and that's from a really small distillery to some of the larger ones that have recently started as well. We've got some casks that are now whiskey, so 3-year-old, from some of the newer distilleries, filled by us, into our choice of wood, and they're brilliant as well. But I mean, we're not in any hurry to release those. We'll bide our time, and it'll probably be 8 years old minimum before we start to see some of those. But
cool.
Fantastic quality, I think.
And a very local specific question from a member on Twitter who asks, when are they, aka the Society, opening a club or member room in Glasgow?
Okay, yeah, this is one that comes up quite often.
This might not be a Euan question, but
yeah,
it's worth asking. It might be more of a question for the other team, but
I'm not really sure.
No,
but I guess what I would say is ask again in 6 months.
Yeah, sure. Those are my questions. Those are Twitter questions, and Euan has very graciously shared some absolute gems of 3 very, very diverse flavour profiles and cask types and distilleries and everything from his personal stash. As I said at the beginning, no expense account was harmed in the making of this video. And we're actually doing this at Euan's house, and it's Saturday. He didn't need to do this, so I really want to thank him just earnestly from all Australian members, from myself, for taking the time to actually share some whiskey on a Saturday afternoon and share a few drams. So with that said, Sanjava. And I'll catch you on the other side, and you'll see a bit more coming from me whilst I'm over here at the moment, and I'll catch you all soon. Cheers, and thanks for watching.